Okay, everybody, welcome to the Practical Tanya. We are at chapter 25 today. Now, chapter 25 is very relevant because it ends a discussion we had for the past 7 chapters. Or the past 7 chapters. As I mentioned many times, they're coming to explain to us the short, long way. What does one do when they cannot do easily, or not in shorthand and short order, they can't do the long, short way, which we talked about in chapters 1 through 17. The long, short way is where you really work on your meditation, your perspective, your reflecting to develop appropriate motivation and drive to fulfill your godly purpose at any given moment. That's wonderful if you can do that. But if you can't, because you don't feel your inner perspective, motivation of God and your higher purpose is all that clear, what do? So chapters 18 said there's got to be a short order way, a quick way that, of course, we ultimately will work towards developing our insides, our perspectives, to be our perspective and our inner motivation to be aligned with our actions. But if we're not up there, we don't have that meditative or contemplative power yet, then what do? So there's a short way, a short-term way. What is that? And to do that short-term way, he has to explain the chariot of God. It was very clear their whole will was God's will. They had no selfish desire other than being a conduit, being an agent for God's will. They're very God-focused. So all of us as children, we have that drive as well. We have that inner pull as well towards connecting to God, towards connecting ourselves, feeling at one with God. Every Jewish soul has that, as we spoke about 18 and 19. And then we talked about in chapters 20 and 21 the concept about the non-dual existence, that even though we feel that there is a duality, there's God and spirituality, and there is the physical world, and it's like two. On the surface of it feels very and experiences that exist in the physical world, they're all powered by God deliberately and continuously giving them energy, life force to continue to exist. Then we got into, we gave a few proofs for that. We said, proof of how you can appreciate everything is really, one and even really subservient to its godly energy in reality. We gave a few proofs. We said, imagine your thoughts before they even come up in your mind. So they're there, let's say you know something, but you're not thinking about it. So before it comes up, it's very much, it's there in you, but it's very, it's hidden within you. So too, everything in this world is a thought of God, is a speech of God. It's all within God. Okay. Then we spoke about in chapters 23, chapter 23, about how every mitzvah, a mitzvah comes from the root word tzavta, bond, Every mitzvah is a bond that helps you reveal the non-dual reality, the fact that everything is one with God. Because in very simple terms, a mitzvah is where a human being in choice takes or a part of his or her life and declares by utilizing it for God's will that this has a divine purpose. When you eat kosher food, you're saying my stomach and food, its purpose is even the whole concept of eating is to be aligned with God, infinite creator's higher purpose. When a person goes to work and they're doing it for the right purpose to make a living and even to earn extra money than they need, but they're going to use it for whether charity or to raise their family or to, live life in an upstanding way, then going to work it's a declaration that this part of my human existence and by extension is a vehicle to reveal and be utilized for God's purpose, God's plan. We spoke about because everything in the world, if it's all God's, existence, why can't we see God? And the answer is because there's something called a tzimtzum, a veil, a filter. And the filter, God hides himself behind this veil filter that we can't see God in the physical world. So, that's why you can't see God. And as a matter of fact, that is the source of the metaphysical source of klipa, of the source of shell, that which covers over God. So that's why you can't. But when you do a mitzvah, you're basically breaking through the shell. You're saying, in spite of the fact that it's physical and God's hidden, I'm still going to use it and declare and feel, and sometimes even emotionally get into it, that this thing, opportunity, experience, component of life is really part of God's plan and is, albeit not spiritual, on the surface, but it is no less part of God's plan. So we're going to continue now in chapter 25. It brings it all together. Oh, in chapters 24, we mentioned the converse that every mitzvah reveals godliness. Every sin hides godliness. It further conceals the godliness because not only now, is a physical thing, a physical existence, let's say a piece of food, just an existence that is powerful. It doesn't reveal or hide God. When it's utilized for a sin, it actually becomes an instrument to further hide God, to go against God's plan, at least temporarily. We can always do teshuvah, we can always repent, but at least in the interim, it's hiding on God's plan and purpose. That, as we said in 24. We also mentioned an important point that in 24, that it makes no difference if it's a sin that's like a whopper sin and an itsy-teensy sin. That in the yes, of course, a whopper sin, stealing or murder, those things, they really conceal God's presence in a very obvious way. They also stain, they blemish until we do teshuvah, they blemish our soul. They blemish our soul. But even a small thing like a minor gossip or even a rabbinic prohibition, because rabbinic prohibitions are also under the umbrella of certain commandment that we have to listen towards the generation's leaders with their extra enactments to safeguard, Torah. But whatever the case is, any sin, even a small one, also is for that moment, maybe not in such grand order, and there won't be as much collateral damage, but even a small sin like gossip or rabbinic enactment on Shabbos, which we cannot obviously compare in its severity to, let's say, stealing or, a flagrant biblical prohibition being broken. But even a small rabbinic prohibition, it's a very small, trivial thing, seemingly trivial, because it goes against God's plan, whether explicitly in the Bible and the Torah, or as is explained and elucidated in the Talmud, which also is part of God's plan, and as is alluded to in many places in the Torah, where for that moment, you're willingly allowing God's presence to be further concealed. So the idea is no different. That's why it said, we mentioned the concept in chapter 20, that the two first commandments, the 10 commandments, they are, I am the Lord your Lord. And second is, you should have no other gods besides me. Basically, the belief in God is the positive, and the negative, don't believe in other deities, don't ascribe power to the deities or any power to them. So we said, it's a famous line, that those two is like a concentrated version of the whole sixth. The mitzvah of belief in God is 248 positive commandments. And the second of the commandments, you do not believe in other gods, is like a concentrated version of the 365 negative commandments. So it's 613 for the price of 2. And based on what I just said, and I just sort of really went through it quickly, we understood, because of the Tanya spelling out why is that so. Because if we understand that the whole purpose, or the whole idea, the whole philosophy of the Torah is that, meaning the why of the basic why we do Torah mitzvahs. Why we do Torah mitzvahs? We do because we want to be ethical people, spiritual, we want to have heritage. What's our reason? I find want, but what's the reason? It's either about bringing God more tangible, so that's like you're fulfilling the mitzvah of belief in God. And when we do a sin, we're concealing a God, which is, in a very extreme version, the concept of believing in other idols. So every mitzvah is an extension of the mitzvah belief in revealing God. Every sin is an extension of the denial or concealment of God. That is a summary of everything we learned from 18 to 24. 25 today, chapter 25, is altogether a very practical use for our original purpose, which is the short, long way. The short, long way of, I need a short hack, the quick hack version to motivate myself to always do mitzvah at hand and to never succumb to the temptation of a sin or laziness or the neglect of duties, which we said that's the idea of the Beinoni. The Beinoni is the one who always ever giving into the temptations of the animal soul. So what's the short hack way of the mitzvahs of how to do that? The long way is contemplate God's existence and realize what's important and don't give in to trivialities. Well, let's say you're not so contemplative. What's the short hack way? The short hack way is based on everything I just said. Before I go on, I want to make sure everybody is clear about that or has any questions they want to clarify. Because once you appreciate sort of that summary and everything we learned the past many weeks, you'll appreciate how it all comes together in chapter 25. Is that it? We all good? Raise your hand if you followed the summary till now. You can do a virtual hand raising. Or, yeah. You can do the, thank you, Carol. You can put in the chat box, you can say all good. Just because I want to, you'll appreciate it. I want to clarify if I didn't make any of the steps didn't make sense.
Yes, we're all good here, Rabbi.
All good. Okay. So you're all going to get your doctorate in Kabbalistic Hasidic philosophy, if you understand that. You're on your way. All right. Chapter 25. And making do with the original version of the Tanya. I don't have commentary, but I did look at the commentary earlier today. Just want to point out this nifty little edition, for those of you that have it, is the Pittsford edition Tanya. The Rebbe in the 80s encouraged Tanyas to be printed in every single town where Jews live. And about 10 years ago or so, 9 years ago, he printed one in, it's backwards, but Pittsburgh, New York. All right. So the Tanya is based on Devarim. Moshe told the Jews, he died. You should know, you should know that the Torah is very close. To do the Torah with your mind, your speech, it's very, and your action is very near to do. Why very near? Because we said before. Based on everything we said before, we can see how a Jewish person has it already within them. They don't have to learn anything. We don't have to wait till we become knowledgeable of contemplation. We have to wait. We don't have to wait till we become very knowledgeable. We can see within ourselves the way we are already, and he's going to explain how you already have it in you, how you can stay away from negative and always seize positive. Because just 1 second. Because we know the video and audio breaking up. Okay, if that's the case, give me a minute. I'm going to go to a better. Is it better now, or should I go to a closer to the Wi-Fi area? Are we good? Good? Wi-Fi good?
It's inconsistent.
It's inconsistent. Okay, so give me a second. I'm gonna move my camera to a closer. I'm gonna move it closer. My apologies. Next time, if there's ever a problem, let me know as early as possible so I can. Okay. Here we are. Okay, it should be a little bit better now. You will let me know if otherwise.
That's much better, much better.
All right, great. Thank you. Sorry for the hassle. All right. So we mentioned in the Tanya, we mentioned it, but here it says explicitly. You want to motivate yourself. You find it hard because, let's face it, everything comes down to a choice of priorities. Are we going to prioritize a divine connection, or are we going to prioritize, a physical, material, or just desirous thing? When you think about it, if you think about it, we mentioned before that a Jewish person Jewish people are unique, that they have given their life when it came to the ultimate sacrifice. When the Crusaders told Jews, convert or die, the vast majority gave their life. They couldn't imagine, publicly renouncing their Judaism. The same by the Inquisition, in other parts of history. And these weren't only great scholars that did this. This was simple people. Many times, even illiterate people, they gave their life rather than renounce, even just like outwardly, their Judaism. That is used as a proof that a Jewish person has, what we said before, that hidden love. They're a son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These sort of godly centric beings. And they have it in them. Now, the thing is that why do they have that? Why do many people have that they'll give their life for Judaism, but when it's a relative calm or a regular part of their life, they don't care as much. Many times there's stories of people, the Holocaust brought out their Jewish feeling, that, pre-war, they were like heretics, or they were, indifferent or antagonistic towards being Jewish, their own Judaism. And once they were, called upon to sacrifice, they found a certain faith they never knew they had. And that's because when it's a black and white type of in an extreme denial, they're like being forced to go against their inner spiritual integrity. It's too stark. It's too like black and white for them. And therefore, they're not able to, they just, at that point, anything they told themselves about not being so religious or whatever, that's all at outer layers of our consciousness. When it gets to this sort of like this very deep choice, there's nowhere to hide. You can't hide behind your degree. You can't hide behind your profession or your hobby or your circle of friends or your being part of the aristocracy. There's nowhere to hide. You can't tell yourself any lies. It's like, are you a godly centric being or not? When it comes to that, the majority of Jews just gave their life. And the Alter Rebbe says, every one of us has it inside of us. This is not only, we should never be called upon to be tested. We actually, at the end of Yom Kippur, if you remember, if you've ever been to the Chabad Ne'ilah, that there's a box towards the end that says, when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and we say 3 times Hashem Hu Elokim, Hashem Hu Elokim, Hashem Hu Elokim, and we say, Shema Yisrael, Baruch Hashem. We say a few times other sayings. It says before that a person should have in mind that they, in theory, they would be willing to give their life if they're ever called upon, and that should be counted. That we shouldn't be called upon to make that that test. So if you would think that you would be willing, by merely being a Jew, and not being a incredibly spiritual religious Jew, but by being a Jew, just scientifically, the statistics are, if it came down towards renouncing your Judaism entirely or giving your life, Jewish people, whether they understood or not, gave their life. They couldn't explain it to themselves many times. It's kind of hard. We think about would I do that? Well, we can't relate to it, but looking at a historical example, that's what Jews did. And recently. So why do they do that? Because it's like a complete denial. It's like a form of you're asking me to cut myself off from God, even just, in verbal renouncing. And I can't do that. It's like picking an idol. It's like idol worship in their mind or in their subconscious. They can't do that to themselves. And they'd be willing to take on much pain and even death to keep that position. So every sin, this is the connection. In a sense, why? Because there it's a stark break, a stark concealment on God, and the Jew can't do that. Well, every sin, intellectually, so let's think about it. Every sin is a rejection of God, albeit tiny, a little bit, maybe not like the way such a renouncing would be, but every sin is a microaggression. Every sin is a micro concealment, a willing concealing and denial of God, at least for that moment. Because if you really thought God, was watching and you were in tune with that, you felt that, you wouldn't do it. So the actions sort of made a person slip into, a concealing and denial of God. So let's say, as an example, small sin. So, there's an idea that after a person, we don't eat milk and meat together, right? Let's say a person really, really likes milk and meat. Whatever. They knew there's something they really want. And it's really, they're getting a little more observant, and they want to be kosher, but it's a really big challenge. And they feel FOMO, fear of missing out. Like, oh man, in college, it's a college kid. Oh, my friends are enjoying, and I'm eating, a can of sardines or something. So, yes, it's painful. It's uncomfortable. It's definitely you're giving something up. But compare that to person dying to preserve their Jewish identity. They'd be willing to go much further lengths for that. So can't you just not eat that delicious food, that delicious unkosher food? Or, oh, well, you might say it's different. There it's like I'm, renouncing my Judaism. Here, it's one thing I'm not going to do. So they say, yeah, that argument only makes sense. It's called rationalizing. The differentiation of, the differentiating between levels of Judaism, of the differentiating between doing God's will or going against God's will are different things. It's a rationalizing. Someone made a joke, rationalizes, rational lies. They're very rational, lie. Because what's at the core of it? There's a certain, you don't want to miss out. You're afraid you're going to miss out. You're afraid or to be uncomfortable. You're going to be losing something. In this case, it's simple, food, food that one likes. But the concept of, are you going to add to God? Are you going to take the opportunity, your life's mission, to reveal God, and basically for this moment to go against it, to throw it in the gutter? So yeah, it's not lifelong, and you can always eventually fix it up. For that moment, you're going to go against your mission as a Jew. It's a very interesting story. And before I tell the story, so think that's this calculation. This is the short hack. If you believe that Jews are connected to God, and when it comes to the ultimate price, where it's black and white, they give their life to stay connected, to stay even outwardly connected to God, because they can't bear to have such a stark denial or renouncing of God, even if it's just superficial. It's just too stark. And that's why they'd rather give their life. And the Torah, it's considered a tremendous merit, someone who does that. If you think that a person would do that, and you probably would do that also, statistically speaking, then why would you do a micro version of denying God, even if the discomfort is hunger or losing something that you want? What do you mean? You'd give your life for the macro version of this. Why in the micro are you willing to throw it out the window for some smaller discomfort, a smaller loss? That is the calculation. Now here's the story. There's a man who he passed on. He was a professor. His name was Professor Green. Professor Green. His first name was Velvel. His parents were like socialist Bund Jews. And they gave him a Yiddish name, Velvel. But he did not grow up religious, and he lived in Minnesota. He was a pretty famous professor. He worked for NASA. He was a macher. And in the 1950s, he got connected to one of the first American Chabad rabbis, a man who's still alive, Rabbi Feller, Rabbi Moshe Feller. And they would have many interesting discussions, and Rabbi Professor Velvel Green, he wasn't fully religious or anything, but he was somewhat traditional, and he was growing in his mitzvahs, but he was not there. He wasn't keeping kosher. He wasn't necessarily keeping Shabbat fully. Anyways, Rabbi Feller one time tells him, look, next time you travel on the plane, I want you to order a kosher meal. And it's in your development. She says, look, I don't keep kosher. His wife maybe kept kosher at home, but when he was out, he didn't keep kosher. He says, but you know what? I'll do you a favor. It makes you happy, Rabbi. I'll order a kosher meal. So he goes on the flight, and sure enough, it's time for the meal, and they can't find his kosher meal. And he's asking, where's my kosher meal? And people are seeing that he's kosher, it's not coming. And then he's like, forget it, I'm not doing this kosher meal. But at that point, he's like, well, I made a whole point about a kosher meal. Now they're going to see me just take any meal, like it seems a lack of integrity. So I'm hungry, and I'm just going to fume that the rabbi got me into this. So at the next, it's a couple hours, the flight, he went to a stopover. At the stopover, he's really hungry, and he sees a hot dog cart. And it was really tantalizing to him because he was really hungry and he was upset also. So he goes to the payphone and he calls Rabbi Feller. Rabbi Feller says, yes. So he says, I'm at a stopover and I'm pretty upset. He says, why? He says, tell him the whole story. You made me get the kosher meal and then I couldn't get it. Now I would look foolish, so I didn't eat it. But now I want to let you know I'm in a stopover, and I'm right next to a treif in a hot dog stand, and I'm going to get a hot dog. I'm just letting you know that I'm going to do that. And after I get one, I'm going to get a second one because I'm really hungry. Just wanted to let you know. I guess they had this sort of, candid relationship. Right? Feller's quiet for a moment, then he says, Professor Green, we've had conversations about, what is the whole point of Judaism? And we've debated and philosophized for hours. I know, we've done that. So what? Says, the whole point, I want to let you know now, the whole point of Judaism is for you not to eat that hot dog. And he hung up. So Professor Green, he was really upset, but he didn't eat the hot dog. And I have a book that they wrote his memoirs. This Professor Green, he became, Baal Teshuva, became more religious in his life, but he was one of the early people to do that. And he tells this story, and it fits very well with what we just learned in Tanya. What's the whole point of Judaism? The whole point of Judaism is for a Jew, as an ambassador of God, to reveal God in this world, by their own moral integrity and their own spiritual integrity, by doing the mitzvahs and staying away from the non-mitzvahs, because every mitzvah is a shining light, making God revealed in this world. And every sin, albeit temporarily, is adding to the concealment. Perhaps that's what he meant. The whole Judaism is not to eat the hot dog, because it's just a hot dog, right? And the guy could go kosher in 2 months from now, right? Well, he wasn't fully kosher. But he says, if you want to say there's an opportunity, you have a temptation, you're very hungry and you're understandably upset, and you want to go eat something that is not in line with the Torah, with God's will. That's understandable. The guy's a human being. He's starving. He's new to this kosher thing. He didn't really do it fully. But he says, in that case, he had some sort of awareness. Like if someone doesn't know any better, at that point, it's not even a choice for them. But this guy had the choice. It was a hard choice for him. And when he decided not to, what was he doing? In a sense, he was breaking an idol. He was breaking his own, desire to go against, to hide on godliness, to hide on God's will. And instead, he did a mitzvah and he revealed God's will. And that's every mitzvah. Every mitzvah, some have more discomfort, some are easier, some are more pleasant, some are more culturally appealing, and some are a pain. And some are actually can make us have a temporary loss, although the Torah believes that no one will ever lose for doing a mitzvah, ultimately. So this applies not just to motivate, this trick, this hack. Think how you would give your life to do God's will and not feel separate from God, even for a second, even for a minute. Because in the case of martyrdom, a person could renounce, they could have renounced themselves, the Judaism, to the Crusaders. And when the Crusaders would have left in a year or two from now, they could have gone back to Judaism. You don't make that calculation. That's another thing. Why don't you make that calculation? Why don't they make that calculation? Like, I'll tell them what they want to know now, and then in a year from now, a month from now, a day from now, whenever I can, I'll go back to being a Jew, religious and everything. Because at a certain part of the soul, it's above time. It's above time. I saw a parable by Rabbi Steinsaltz that it's like a key. A key has teeth, and the lock has the groove for the teeth. And when they get aligned, it opens it up. So to every mitzvah is like aligning yourself. It's like a key to open up the door, open up God's presence, connecting to God in a very obvious way. Every sin further makes a greater blockage. And when you do a mitzvah, it's like you're opening the key. You're opening your key is for that thing, is opening the door to God's presence. Many times where our body or our rationalize, tell ourselves, I don't want to get up to go pray today because I'm too beat from exercising yesterday, or I have such a busy day, or a very hard day, or I don't want to give charity. I'll give a little bit, but even though I can do more, I just want to I want to be more careful. What's going on there? We're putting sometimes our physical discomfort or sometimes our monetary discomfort, we're telling ourselves, even though this is above time. Let me just look inside. When you do God's will, is that something which can be taken away? When God's will is revealed, can that be taken away? Yes or no question. Anybody?
No,
Okay, thank you, Susan. Why no?
because once it's done, it's done. Like it's eternally done.
Yeah, but
Above
wait a
time.
second. If someone sins, we say that could get taken away through the teshuvah, the washing, right? They wash themselves. So how come the converse, when someone does a good deed, then they retract it or they do bad, they feel bad about it and they want to revert to wicked ways. Why doesn't that undo the good they've done?
Because
So, in very short, God's will is God's above time, and God's will is by extension above time. It's timeless. Now, of course, we are within time and we are within the finite world. So our triggering God's will is under certain circumstances in certain ways. That's what Judaism is like. The who, the what, and the when. How do you do that? But what we're triggering, that's the catalyst, is truly in the finite world. But what it's causing, the explosion, so to speak, is an infinite explosion of divinity. Because God's will, God's pleasure, God's plan going forward is something which is in God's, is God is above time. So the God's will taking place is also going to be an everlasting effect. And therefore, whenever God's...
Well, don't they also say it's all accumulative for Moshiach, because they don't get taken away, they just get added. All the mitzvahs.
Right, but I'm saying, let's say somebody, does something really nice to somebody else. They're very kind. Let's example, a person decides to do a mitzvah, keep kosher. And then a year later, they say, I regret it, I'm going back to not going kosher. I regret it, I'm angry, it was foolish. We say the 1 year they kept kosher, the 1 month, that is timeless. That'll always be a merit for them.
Right.
Even if they recanted. Why? Because for that time, it was a catalyst for God's will taking place. And God's will, God is above time. So the effect is above time. Now, it's interesting, a sin is not an everlasting effect. Because a sin is where we choose to further the concealment of God through an action. But that's only the superficial level. And when we finally do teshuvah, we repent, and we are promised that one way or another, everybody's soul is going to repent, this lifetime or the next. When a person does teshuvah, you actually retroactively make your whole journey part of developing this higher recognition of teshuvah to God. So nothing can forever go against God. It can just temporarily go against God. So that's therefore both in positive and negative commandments. If you want to talk to yourself, conversation you have to have with yourself. This is something that you have not just power to not do, overcome the temptation. You would overcome a far worse test of faith, even at the cost of your life. So why can't you be? That's a proof that that's very important to you, and it's very real of you. So a smaller thing, which doesn't have that sort of adrenaline do or die type of thing, it's going against your life's mission. Why would you do that? It's not as dramatic, fine, granted, and it doesn't feel as bad or as stark of a cutting off, but it is. At that moment, you're slapped. It's like you said last week. You're taking the king's face and you're dunking in the toilet. As it gave the graphic, it says they didn't have a toilet back then. There was a toilet pot. Very good question. Deb asked a question. Let me just pull it up. Didn't JC have mitzvot but lost all their merit and ended up in endless Gehenim and other sinners? Kerach. That is a very good question. I have to think about that. It does say in the Talmud there are certain Jews that they do such damage. I think mainly it wasn't just that they do in their own life. They lead a whole generation in rebellion against God, like Kairach did or JC did. That
It's just yay. There's no C in there.
Oh, okay.
Don't add the C. That's bad.
Okay. No problem. I don't know. I've had the question. It's a famous piece of Talmud that people say, how could anybody not, if it's all temporary, why some sins seem to be so, like very few, but someone who's a heretic and leads many others astray, it seems to be everlasting. I don't know. I have to look into it. You can hold me to that next week. And also, it's a motivation. This. What?
Because there's so much destruction to the Jewish people.
Right.
Like, they cause so much destruction and lead so many people away from their faith. I mean, that's why. I mean, like, what else?
Right. But that would be the simple answer, but seemingly all the good he did is eternal, so why is it?
Maybe it's false good. His good wasn't really good.
I don't know if everybody who sins, even majorly in life, you could say that they had no times in life where they did mitzvahs authentically. I don't know if you could say everything they did was a phony. I don't think you could say that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm gonna go on. So, but to ourselves also, when we're lazy, or we're not motivated to give extra charity or to do an extra mitzvah because it's just not, I have other priorities. I have fear of missing out. I don't want to, whether it's laziness or fear, whatever it is, we prioritize other things. And that can all those things we tell ourselves, if we tell ourselves, that's not what I really want. Proof, I would give my life for what I really want, to stay connected to Hashem. So these things, obviously, they might be tempting, but it's not really what I want. If it's not in the scope of what God wants from me in this situation, and we have to always ask him, what does God want? What's God want here? Yeah. How many mitzvahs today? How much of Shabbos should we be keeping this week more than we're used to? How much tzedakah should we give? You give till it hurts, as they say, right? It's a real thing, because the hurt, whether it's for charity or anything else, is inconsequential compared to what you would give you'd suffer, you'd be willing to suffer much worse. So why for a minor inconvenience or suffering where you're holding back? And with this, we can understand why Moshe, who did he tell the Shema to? He told the Shema at the end of the 40 years in the desert. This is the generation, after the generation that left Egypt died out, the next generation is about to go into Israel. And he promised them, in Israel, you are going to, God's going to make you successful against your enemies in the conquest. But say the Shema every day, because the Shema is, you remind yourself you're willing to have self-sacrifice. Wait a second. What's self-sacrifice? Carol, it's a great question. I'll answer in a minute. Remind me if I don't. They're going to win. God promised you're going to win all the wars. So why did Moshe say the Shema to remind yourself of the Jewish ability to have martyrdom and self-sacrifice? They're not going to have to need self-sacrifice, as they didn't. They won pretty well. The answer is, Moshe is telling them, not for winning in war, it's for, you're going to go into Israel, where the first time they're going to have many more mitzvahs, because they had an agricultural community for the first time in Israel. And they're going to have all society there, which in the desert, God took care of them. So they didn't really have much challenge of leading a Jewish life. In Israel, it's going to be hard to lead a Jewish life. So remind yourself, Shema, say the Shema in the morning, in the evening. It's a mitzvah, by the way, say the Shema in the morning, in the evening. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the God is our God, God is one, which is the declaration of faith of a Jew. And when it all comes down to it, we believe God is one, and we're willing to give our life for that. That calculation, that realization of we're willing to give our life for that is relevant, not just when it comes to giving your life, but even when you're just trying to overcome a small temptation. You say, why? A small temptation is going to be a micro hiding on God, or not micro, hiding on God for that moment. I would give my life to not hide on God. So why am I going to do this? And that's the short hack, the short, long way that helps you overcome a temptation to do a sin, and a motivation to excel, pushing yourself to do in positive mitzvahs the maximum possible. And that this meditation, the comparing ourselves to what would we do in a life or death, martyrdom situation, helps us do the small mitzvahs, not get tripped up, even though we don't have the spiritual adrenaline of a do or die situation. That ends chapter 25. I hope you enjoyed it. It's very bold. So Carol asked a question before. At a certain point, we do the best we can. How do we judge? That is really a good question. Does God want every single person? I know we have a very diverse group of people in the class, different observances levels and different education. And the answer is, a Jew is supposed to be looking up. The Rebbe told a bunch of college students once, A good Jew is a Jew who's looking up in the ladder. I mean, you could be anywhere in the ladder. It means you're not doing full observance or whatnot, but you're looking to connect to God, be fully Jewish as much as you can. We all have a life. We all put in situations, and we're all required to go one rung of the ladder every day. So how do you judge? You speak to your rabbi, you speak to your friend, you talk to yourself. What does God want me to max out today? It's like, weightlifting. You're not expected to bench press 500 pounds, 1,000 pounds the first day. What's my weight of today? What's the maximum my work that I can do? I should be doing today to build stamina and to get closer to the most thorough Jewish experience I can have in my life. So you talk it over. You have to have a mentor. One thing is you have to have a mentor. Two, you have to, talk to yourself. So that is that. I want to mention here an opportunity here for everybody. And that is, there's a publication I recommended a few years ago called Chayenu. Chayenu is a magazine, a Torah magazine in English. In Hebrew, but English annotation and translation. And it's every week it comes out another, the Torah portion of the week with commentary and some other things. And it's very popular. It's tens of thousands of copies in the world going out. And I wanted to offer everybody a gift, 6 weeks of a gift subscription that Chabad of Pittsburgh will pay, for you to receive this magazine for the first 6 weeks. After that, you can decide if you want to subscribe. And you can learn the daily Torah portion in English. You can learn the daily Tanya. There's a daily Tanya cycle besides what we're doing is more in depth. And other interesting things that give you an opportunity to learn, learn Judaism the same. It's like a book club almost. It's like a magazine book club of things that Jews around the world are learning at the same time. So if you're interested in that, please send me an email or text me, and I'll send you a link, and you can fill out a form, and you'll receive at your house 6 weeks worth of this beautiful publication, and you can further your learning on your own. Maybe if there's enough interest, we can, if you'd like to have a study partner, we can find maybe two people can learn together. But either way, it's a great magazine to further your Judaism and your Torah knowledge. Send me an email or a text if you'd like it, and I will happily send it to you as my gift to you.
I have a question, Rabbi.
It's both paper. It'll come physical hard copy, which is nicer to learn in a way. But you'll also get access for the 6 weeks to the app. They have an online app. Everything in the magazine.
I'm signed up for the JLI course, but it's going to be on Tuesday nights. Is it going to conflict with your class? I hope not.
So I asked Rabbi Vogel, and he did. It was an oversight. It's a good question.
Which may be the Wednesday?
So I would.